The snow had begun to thaw, leaving the ground wet and clinging to my skirts as we walked up toward the chapel. The priests called it Saint Valentine's Day. Something about pairing people together under God's will. It all sounded strange to me, but no one dared question the priests. I drew a name from the box. Cassianus, I said aloud. He stepped forward, a tall man with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed too still. His hair hung loose, damp-looking despite the cold air. He extended his hand to me, and when I placed mine in his fingers were icy and held on just a moment too long. We were told to spend time together, talk, learn about each other. He offered to show me the woods by the river. I wanted to stay where it was busy near the others, but I didn't want to seem unkind. So I followed him. The path through the trees was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears. He didn't talk much at first, just asked odd questions now and then. If I believed in spirits, if I ever heard things when I was alone. I laughed a little, said no, hoping that would be the end of it. But he just kept watching me, like he was waiting for a different answer. "Do you dream often?" he asked suddenly. I shook my head. "Not that I remember." "That's good," he said almost to himself. "Dreams can invite things." I stopped walking. The trees were thick here, and I couldn't see the path ahead clearly. "We should go back," I said. He didn't move right away, just stood there looking at me. Then he smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. "You're afraid?" he said. "I'm not," I lied. He reached into his cloak and pulled out a small wooden charm carved into the shape of a bird. "For you," he said. "A gift." I didn't want to take it, but I didn't know how to refuse. The wood felt warm in my hand, like it had been pressed too tightly. "Do you know what they used to do today, before the priests changed everything?" he asked, his voice quieter now. I shook my head, gripping the charm. "They left offerings for the old gods," he said, "asking for blessings or forgiveness." Something moved in the trees, a shadow that flickered and was gone. I looked around, trying to see, but Cassianus was still watching me, like he hadn't noticed anything. "We need to go back," I said again, this time firmer. I turned and started walking, not waiting for him to follow. My heart was pounding, and I could hear his steps behind me, slow and deliberate. When we reached the edge of the village, he stopped. "Until next time," he said. I didn't look back, hurrying home with the charm still clutched in my hand. That night I left it on the table by my bed. In the middle of the night, I woke to a sound, a faint tapping, like nails against wood. I sat up, heart racing, but the room was empty. The charm was still there, untouched. In the morning, it was gone. The door was bolted, and no one else had been in the house. But when I stepped outside, I saw footprints in the mud beneath my window, leading back toward the woods. They weren't human footprints. Long toes clawed at the tips, pressed deep into the softened earth. I told myself it was a trick of the light, the mud smearing the shape. But that day, Cassianus appeared again, waiting by the chapel as though he'd been standing there for hours. He didn't speak when I passed. He only smiled, his eyes following me like a predator watching prey. That night, the tapping returned, louder this time. I bolted the shutters and prayed, my hands trembling. It was coming from the window again, rhythmic and deliberate. I whispered to myself that it was the wind, that I'd imagined the bird charm on the table when it was never really there at all. But then I heard his voice, low and clear. "Do you dream often?" The sound came from just outside the window, but I couldn't bring myself to look. My body froze. the covers pulled tight against me as though they could shield me from the impossible. The tapping stopped. Then the silence pressed in again. When I finally gathered the courage to move, I peeked outside. The footprints were there again, closer now, leading to my door. I didn't sleep. By morning, the village was alive with whispers. 2 others who'd drawn names were missing, their houses empty. People said they must have run off together, but I knew better. I could feel the weight of the charm still, even though it was gone. It was his gift, his mark, and I knew he'd be back for me. When I went to the chapel that afternoon, I saw him again. He stood in the shadows, not speaking, but watching. And in his hand was the bird charm, turning slowly between his fingers.
Like this always bring out the extremes, grand romantic gestures, lonely hearts, and in my line of work, drama I want no part of. I pull up to the curb outside a candlelit restaurant, the kind where the check costs more than my weekly gas. A girl stands there, wrapped in a thin red shawl, shivering in the February cold. Her eyes are swollen, her makeup smeared. She looks around like she's waiting for someone, or running from them. I roll down the window. "For Mia?" She nods, yanks the door open, and slides into the back seat, her breath shaky. "Drive, please." I don't ask questions. I hit the gas. The navigation says 18 minutes to her destination. I figure she had a bad date, some Valentine's cliche where the guy turns out to be a cheating asshole and she just wants to go home. Then, just as I check the rear view, the passenger door yanks open. A guy stumbles in. Not just any guy. He's disheveled, dark curls hanging over his forehead, red-faced and gripping something in his fist. A knife. Mia gasps, pressed against the door. "Ethan, stop." "Drive," he growls. His voice is low, shaking with something primal. "Drive, man. Now." My fingers tighten around the steering wheel. I glance at Mia. Her hand is on the door handle, but she doesn't dare move. Ethan exhales, eyes wild. "You think you can just walk away?" His voice quivers, half laugh, half snarl. "After everything we've been through." I keep my tone level. "Look, man, I just drive people where they want to go." Ethan's grip on the knife tightens. "Yeah? Then drive. Don't make me ask again." The navigation is still blinking. 17 minutes left. It might as well be a lifetime. I take a slow breath and ease onto the road. My mind races. Do I gun it for a police station? Will that set him off? Mia sniffles, voice small. "Ethan, please, you're scaring me." "Good." He leans closer. "Because I love you, Mia, and I know you love me too." The knife flashes under the passing streetlights. I drive in silence, heart hammering, waiting for an opening, a sign, anything. Then, up ahead, an intersection, a red light. I slow down, hoping for a cop car, a crowded sidewalk, anything. But the street is nearly empty. I keep my foot on the brake, glancing at the rear view. Then, movement, a group of pedestrians stepping onto the crosswalk as the signal changes. Ethan exhales sharply. His grip on the knife twitches. "Go. Just go." I stay put. Lights red. He shifts, agitated. The people crossing the street glance at us, unaware of the tension inside the car. Mia takes the chance. She moves fast. Her hand shoots forward, knocking Ethan's wrist. The knife clatters to the floor. I react instantly. I shove my door open, throwing my weight against Ethan as I tumble out. He snarls, trying to recover, but Mia's already grabbing the knife, fumbling with the door handle. The pedestrians notice now. Someone shouts. A guy in a heavy coat steps toward us. "Hey, what's going on?" Ethan scrambles, eyes darting. He shoves the door open, bolts from the car, and disappears down the street. I don't chase him. I just stand there, chest heaving as the weight of what just happened sinks in. The police arrive minutes later. Mia answers their questions while an officer pulls me aside for my statement. Somewhere down the block, red and blue lights flicker as they search for Ethan. I lean against the car, watching as the officers take notes. The ride is still open on my phone, the timer running like none of this happened. Mia doesn't say much. When the cops are done with her, she stands near the curb, arms wrapped around herself, waiting for a ride that isn't mine. As I close the app, I glance up. Our eyes meet for half a second. She gives me a small nod, acknowledgement, nothing more, then looks away. I take the hint. I get in the car, put it in drive, and pull back into the night. A few blocks down, my hands still feel stiff on the wheel. My chest is tight, the adrenaline refusing to settle. The city keeps moving, restaurants closing up, couples weaving through sidewalks, streetlights humming, like none of it ever happened. My phone buzzes, another ride request. I pull over, staring at the screen. 5-star passenger, pickup less than a mile away. Easy money. I rub my face, exhale. My shift was supposed to last another 2 hours. For a second, my finger hovers over accept. Then I lock the screen, set the phone down, and keep driving. Tonight, someone else can take the next ride.
Emma and Jake had booked a small house for their romantic weekend getaway. Nestled on the edge of a vast forest, the house promised seclusion, offering the perfect place to unplug from the hustle of everyday life and reconnect with each other. The Airbnb listing had shown a charming, modern home with sleek, minimalist interiors and a large glass door that opened onto a private garden. A stone path wound its way through overgrown ivy, leading into the dense forest that surrounded the property. The most alluring feature, the house was isolated, with no immediate neighbors in sight, ensuring a peaceful retreat. The host, a man named Daniel, had glowing reviews, always responsive and accommodating. He even offered to leave them a bottle of wine as a welcoming gesture. Everything seemed perfect. They arrived in the late afternoon. The house was exactly as described, spotlessly clean, cozy, and well-maintained, with an inviting warmth that immediately made them feel at home. On the kitchen table, a handwritten note awaited them, written in neat, careful script. Welcome. Make yourselves at home. If you need anything, feel free to reach out. Daniel. They spent the evening cooking, savoring the wine, and chatting in the soft glow of the pendant lights hanging above the kitchen island. They opened a bottle of red wine and enjoyed the deep silence surrounding them. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the trees outside. The house seemed alive with quiet, welcoming energy. It felt like they were the only ones left in the world. It was perfect, but that tranquility wouldn't last. At around 11 p.m., after a few rounds of wine, Emma stood up to lock the large glass door before heading to bed. As her fingers brushed against the cool metal of the handle, something outside caught her eye. She stepped closer to the glass, her breath fogging up the surface as she peered out into the garden. There on the wooden deck were footprints, fresh footprints. Her pulse quickened. They hadn't stepped outside all evening, and the prints, distinct and recent, were unmistakable. She froze. Could it be the host, Daniel? Maybe he had come by to check on the place, or perhaps a delivery had been made earlier. Emma tried to shake off the unease bubbling up inside her. It didn't make sense, but it didn't sit right either. Jake, she called, her voice trembling slightly. I think someone's been outside. Jake, looking relaxed, glanced toward the door. He smiled, not fully catching her distress. Maybe it's just Daniel or someone from the maintenance crew. Don't worry about it. It's probably nothing, but still, Emma couldn't shake the feeling. She brushed it off and decided to go to bed, hoping a good night's sleep would clear her mind. At 3 a.m., Emma woke with a start, her eyes snapping open in the darkness. Her breath caught in her chest. She lay still, her ears straining, trying to make sense of it. The house was quiet, save for the faint rustling of leaves outside. Yet, there it was again, a sound like soft footsteps moving across the floorboards. Her heart raced. Every muscle in her body went rigid. She turned slowly toward Jake. He was still sleeping soundly beside her, his breathing slow and even. She hesitated, but something deep inside told her she wasn't imagining this. Then, unmistakably, the sound came again. Footsteps. Inside the house, Emma's heart began to pound against her ribcage. She couldn't breathe. She reached over, shaking Jake awake. "Jake, wake up," she whispered urgently. "Someone's in the house." Jake shot upright, his eyes wide with confusion. They sat frozen, holding their breath. The silence between them felt thick, as though the air itself was holding its breath. Then, another creak. A floorboard in the living room groaned under the weight of someone's footfall. Jake looked at Emma, eyes wide, his mind racing. He reached for the heavy metal candle holder on the dresser, anything to defend themselves. It was a poor weapon, but it was all they had. Emma fumbled for her phone, but there was no signal. Of course. Jake moved slowly, cautiously, opening the bedroom door just a crack. The hallway was empty, bathed in the faint glow of moonlight from the window. No one was there, but the tension was unbearable. They moved forward, footsteps light, hearts pounding. The living room was empty, eerily still, but the front door was ajar, just slightly open, as though someone had left in a hurry. Jake stepped closer to the door, his breath shallow. Through the darkness, he saw it, a shadow disappearing between the trees at the edge of the garden. A figure, tall and indistinct, slipping into the forest like a wisp of smoke. Without a word, they slammed the door shut, locking it with a loud click. Panic surged through Emma's chest. They quickly checked the entire house. Nothing had been stolen, no signs of forced entry. Yet, there was something that didn't feel right. In the living room, a chair had been moved. It wasn't in the same spot they had left it. It was as if someone had been sitting there, in the dark, watching them while they slept. They spent the rest of the night awake, backs against the wall, every creak of the house making them jump. Every flicker of light cast strange shadows on the walls. Their minds raced, but they couldn't make sense of it. At dawn, exhausted and terrified, they packed their bags in a hurried frenzy, wanting to leave as quickly as possible. On the drive back, Emma sent a message to Daniel. Someone came into the house last night. She stared at the screen, waiting for a reply, but none came. An hour later, Daniel's Airbnb account had vanished. They never found out who that man was or what he wanted. But one thing was certain. He had known they were there.